We all remember our first time. Oh, yeah, that one. Or perhaps the first time our consciousness was raised around injustice and how life isn't fair. For Siddhartha, it was wandering out of the sheltered palace walls to encounter, gasp, poor people and people who were ill. It was this encounter with suffering that encouraged him to seek a better way of showing compassion to others and drove him to sit under a Bodhi tree. For Unitarian Universalists, justice seeking is embedded in our faith's DNA. I know a birthright UU who said her first memory of a family outing was a protest, or what we now call a public witnessing event. Holding up a sign becomes a rite of passage, much like our version of catechism or confirmation, except it doesn't take place in the Sunday school classroom, but rather out in the streets. Unfortunately, that was not my upbringing. Polar opposite, as a matter of fact. My parents were quite pleased with the dictatorial regime in the Philippines, thank you very much, and thought our responsibility was to not get involved with politics and not to rock the boat in any shape, way, or form, or to be noticed for that matter. Besides, for them, it's pointless because we can change little anyway, so why even bother? Instead, we need to focus on getting a good education, finding a well-paying job, marrying the perfect spouse, and supporting your family along the way. Oh, and by the way, being faithful just meant that you and Jesus were this close. Otherwise, religion and politics don't mix. Now, while I still agree with one of the founders of the US and Unitarian sympathizer, Thomas Jefferson, who called for a high wall of separation between church and state, I still believe Unitarian Universalism has something to say about public policies as they relate to our values around social justice. But we'll get to that later. I want to get back to my family's expectations. It was bad enough I majored in film studies for my undergraduate degree, which my mom thought was a worthless degree. After all, she did not know of any Asian Americans who made a living off of that. Apparently, she's never heard of a filmmaker named Ong Lee. At that time, I harbored the notion that I could change the world by making movies that raised all our social awareness and consciousness. But in reality, I couldn't stand the dysfunction in Hollywood and the level of narcissism I encountered, especially amongst certain celebrities who shall remain nameless. I left after working in the biz for 3 years to work for a multinational corporation instead as a graphics specialist, creating PowerPoint presentations for consultants all day long. In the meantime, I was also volunteering at my church, operating the PowerPoint slides along with the soundboard and the camera. I was basically the Matt equivalent, which, by the way, is a super vital ministry in any congregation. Amen. At some point, I mustered enough chutzpah to talk to my minister about my vision to start a young adults group. I was, after all, one at the time, although I could count with one hand, literally, the number of young people under 35. I was so nervous because I was way more comfortable playing the behind the scenes role than public speaking or organizing meetings or fundraising or gasp, talking to the board about my proposal. But I did it anyway. I did it for Jacob, not his real name, a 20-year-old who got kicked out of his Seventh-day Adventist home when he came out and was an aspiring singer in LA. He was living in a transition shelter, and I picked him up every Friday to bring him to our gathering. I also did it for Craig, not his real name either, who was houseless and didn't come to our official discussion group, but joined us afterwards when we hung out at a local coffee shop, ranting on and on about his encounters with Connie Chung. Some of you may remember or recognize that name. We all knew that wasn't Jamba Juice he was drinking, even though that was the cup that it was housed in, because we could smell the alcohol from all the way across the table. But he was accepted and loved for who he was anyway by the entire group. On and on the names went of a ragtag group of young people that society discarded, but love somehow, in the midst of all the obstacles, created a table for. And when someone like Anna would be missing from a meeting, I would ask my minister if she knew what happened to her or if she's heard from her. And that's when she told me I had a pastor's heart. I just looked back at her as if she were crazy and out of her mind. Are you talking to me? In my best Robert De Niro impersonation. Are you talking to me? I resisted the call to ministry because I knew it would be a downwardly immobile career choice instead of an upwardly mobile one that would please my parents. But the universe had other ideas in mind. Slowly, like every other multinational corporation, our job was being outsourced to India, which might not have been a bad thing in hindsight because it gave me more time to focus on seminary, and it gave me more opportunities to practice pastoral care to those who were involved with my young adults group. It allowed me to be present to those I was truly being called to serve. My first month in seminary, by the way, occurred during September 11th of 2001. All of a sudden, my worldview began to shift even more as the level of Islamophobia skyrocketed. And we debated in our classrooms in real time a theology of just war. And we talked about the root of terrorism and other issues that certainly had no easy answers. I knew that at the end of the day, there was only one question left for me to answer, and that was, how will I respond to all these injustices? If not me, then who? There was a hymn we used to sing, and I actually selected it for my ordination service. It was based on Isaiah 6:8 and penned by Dan Shute back in 1979. Here's how it goes. I, the Lord of snow and rain, I have borne my people's pain. I have wept for love of them. They turn away. I will break their hearts of stone, give them hearts for love alone. I will speak my word to them. Whom shall I send? Here I am, Lord. Is it I, Lord? I have heard you calling in the night. I will go, Lord, if you lead me. I will hold your people in my heart. The next verse goes, I, the Lord of wind and flame, I will tend the poor and lame. I will set a feast for them. My hand will save. Finest bread I will provide till their hearts be satisfied. I will give my life to them. Whom shall I send? Here I am, Lord. Is it I, Lord? I have heard you calling in the night. I will go, Lord, if you lead me. I will hold your people in my heart. I know our language has shifted since, as has my theology, but the sentiment, I think, behind those words remains compelling to me. In the midst of the world's pain and suffering, who will answer the call to alleviate it? Theologian Frederick Buechner says that vocation is where the world's greatest need and a person's greatest joy meet. Vocation is where the world's greatest need and the person's greatest joy meet. For me, my vocation was born of my own heartbreak and experience of the world's rejection of young people who were made divine, but the world cast off as being deviant and sinful. The Jacobs and Craigs and Annas. Starting a young adult group was the root of my activism and my first time. I've dedicated my life and ministry since to making sure all beings have their inherent worth and dignity intact. That's what brings me joy. And I now get why UUs take our kids to pride parades and to Standing Rock and to Grassy Narrows. Because our faith doesn't ask us to sit on the sidelines when there's injustice going on. Instead, our faith calls us to side with love and to center our own core values in everything that we do. I love how South Asian activist Deepa Iyer breaks it down into these circles. Thank you, Angela, for including this in this month's Journey Groups packet. At the core and center in yellow there is our shared values around equity, liberation, justice, and solidarity. That to me is our why, the reason and the purpose of why we do what we do. The outer circles for me represent the how, by telling our stories through short videos or testimonies or TikTok videos, by engaging with healing practices like yoga or Reiki, or disrupting the status quo like ACT UP did back in the 80s and 90s to demand treatment for HIV and AIDS, or by caregiving, which, by the way, is not the antithesis of activism. I know some congregations try to say, well, we want to try to focus more on spiritual growth instead of activism, and all that other social justice stuff we could just put on the back burner. But in my mind, it's actually both and. We can practice spiritual care while engaging with social justice issues. There are so many ways that our activism could be played out. It doesn't have to just be in those grand acts, but as Malala pointed out during our opening words, even those small acts of kindness and compassion can make a great difference. I'll be talking more about that in the next couple of weeks, so be sure to keep tuning in. On and on it goes about those circles that you saw earlier, and I would encourage you to go to her website to find out more about how we could work all the way from an individual level to creating organizations that feel change, and then finally to that outer circle of going wider still to advocate for systemic and social change. So many things to do, so little time. And the key is to not overwhelm ourselves or burn out along the way. Again, that'll be the third week in this series on activism. For now, I invite us to begin with our why. People are being wrongfully sent to concentration camps in El Salvador. Our children are dying from preventable diseases because they don't have access to basic health care. There is an immense amount of work that needs to be done. What's that voice calling you in the night? What gets the fire in your belly going? Whom shall I send? Let's take a few deep breaths to ponder these questions.